all the preachers tell people who really Jesus really is. We're all sinners. Being good, give them in heaven, Lord. None of us are good. Thank you for Jesus, thank you for the cross, and the blood that was shed for us, and lift up those on the prayer list, and those who wish to some of our family and their loss, and others who are lost, Lord, our prayers for the children, and all that's being done today across our country, Lord, our nation. Families being attacked by our government. Pray for America, people in this country to wake up. That there be repentance, which not only the labor, but the people in this nation and as a people. Forgive us our sins, and lead us through this life, that you will mercy. Please, Father, that our hearts be touched, and our minds more and more be touched. In Jesus' name.
Can I bribe somebody out of a cup of coffee?
Yeah. You got it, Kevin? Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Good waitress this morning.
That's right. All right, so we're going to do, y'all are kind of like splitting the Red Sea. But it's okay.
We want you to be confused as which way to look.
There you go. There you go. So we are in chapter 13. We're going to handle the first beast this morning. We'll take care of the second beast next week. And I'm not entirely sure what will happen after that. It'll depend on how kind of our Sunday school classes break up. Okay. If I wind up with mostly new people, we may start something new. If I wind up with mostly the same people, no. No. But we're going to keep trucking as long as y'all are here. How about that? All right, so the first beast, let's read chapter 13, verses 1 to 10. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. So when we last left the dragon, he was standing on the sand of the sea. And I told you, this kind of makes me think of this sort of cinematic moment where the camera kind of like zooms in on the profile of the dragon, and then you see the water and it's bubbling up and this thing is starting to emerge. I mean, I don't think we should read this flat. I think it was dramatic as John was experiencing it, so I think we probably ought to imagine it that way as well. The dragon who is mad, who has been making war against the woman whom last week I said I identify as the church, the woman and her offspring, who are also sort of the continuation of the church. During that 42 months, 1260-day period where symbolically evil is on the rampage, so to speak. And so now, in the middle of this, the dragon has attempted to wage war against the woman, and now he's standing on the shore of the sea enraged, and we get this first beast. So his position there on the sand of the sea then, as we look at verses 1 and 2, allows him to see the beast coming out of the sea, just as the second beast will come rising out of the earth. Now, John has prepared us for this because we saw the great angel in chapter 10. Remember that angel comes in. He has the little scroll, and he sets his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land to remind us that God both figuratively and literally reigns over and controls all. I'm just thinking of this now. But if you go all the way back to the creation story in Genesis, what do we know about the Spirit of God? That it hovered over the water, right? It's not something that's in the water. I mean, when we think about water, maybe to us it's not nearly the force that it was to the ancient world. Water is unpredictable. Water is strong. You can't really do anything. If you're on a ship and you get shipwrecked, there's nothing you can do about it. When the waves start going like that, it's just where you are. So the experience with water is different, and I think that's part of the reason why this one beast is coming up out of the sea, right? Because it is chaos, it is problematic, and yet we see at the beginning of creation, the Spirit hovers over the water, exercising that control over it. We see Jesus having control, calming the storms, and now we come to Revelation, and we have the mighty angel standing 1 foot on the sea, not in the sea, but on the sea, and 1 foot on the land, right? And so now in chapter 13, this beast comes up out of the sea, but positionally, where does that mean? It's coming out of under the foot of this great angel, if that angel is still there. So what we're beginning to see, I guess the best way I know how to put it is we're beginning to see Satan's true colors. Because Satan and the two beasts are an unholy trinity, a parody of God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. Right? Now, whether John is sort of intentionally framing things this way or not, I don't really know. I think he probably is, because the roles of the two beasts and the dragon are so clearly defined, and they're defined in ways that mirror the roles of the members of the Trinity. But I don't want to get too far ahead on that yet. We'll say more about it in a minute. We're given a two-part description of this first beast. Verses 1 to 4 describe the beast itself and its relationship to the dragon, concluding with the people's response. And then the second part runs from verses 5 to 8, where John describes the beast's activities and the people's response. And then at the end, verses 9 to 10, we get a section with a warning and an exhortation to God's people. This is kind of how this breaks out. Now, this image of the beast that we get is very strange to us, but if we know our Bibles, we're already beginning to feel the resonances, again, with Daniel chapter 7. As I said last week, it's sort of like where Daniel ends, John kind of picks up with the story at this point. It certainly would not have been unfamiliar to John's readers. That those prophets had been read and taught for a long time, let's put it that way, leading into John. And the early church, we have to remember the early church has much stronger Jewish roots than we have now. And I don't mean that in the sense that the Jewish roots have gone away. I mean, we have forgotten them. And so that intense focus on deliverance and that kind of prophecy is kind of, it's not in vogue anymore. You know, it's not the thing that we want to talk about. We might like to talk about the apocalyptic and the annihilation and the destruction and all that. But we like to talk about it in terms of God's justice and God's wrath against the unbelieving world. When the other side of that picture is, yeah, God's justice against the unbelieving world, but also the final, ultimate redemption of who we are. So John's readers are coming at this with that prophetic sort of deliverance, Exodus narrative that's been marinating in their brains since they were children. They're coming at it with Daniel that's been marinating in their brains since they were children. And now John is recalling the four beasts that are recorded by Daniel in Daniel 7, verses 1 through 8. And you'll remember it's been a while since we were in Daniel, but when we looked at Daniel, we talked about those four beasts in that section represent the consecutive world powers over history to that point. And so we start with Babylon, then we have Persia, then we have Greece, and then we have Rome. Of course, Daniel doesn't know anything about Persia, Greece, and Rome yet. We're still in Babylonian captivity at that point. So it is very much future prophecy for him. Now John is coming on the scene when that has been fulfilled in some sense, right? We have arrived at Rome. We understand what's going on. But he's saying a prophetic word about Rome, and he's saying a prophetic word about the empires and the ruling powers that are going to come along after it. So he picks up on this image of the fourth beast and notes that the beast from the sea has 7 heads and 10 horns. So I like the way, I'm sure this is just me being me, but I like the way that John does this, because it's almost like we can also watch the beast rise out of the sea, right? First we see the horns and the crowns on the horns, and then we see the 7 heads and the blasphemous names. That issue of the names, I kind of want to skip and go to that for just a minute. The issue of the names, we don't really know whether John has particular names in mind here or not. It could be, some people have made the argument that it is a parody, a blasphemous parody of the plaque that was over the cross. Jesus, King of the Jews, right? And so some have said that it's sort of a blasphemous parody of that. We have also seen in Revelation, and we will see whenever Christ comes and he's riding on the white horse and he's leading the armies in, he has a name written on his sash. And so there's this business about naming and all of that stuff. I don't know what John has particularly in mind here, but there is little doubt that what he's describing is Rome. And so to get some of that understanding, you don't have to turn there, but I'm just going to read to you from Revelation 17, verses 9 to 12, where this beast is described a little more helpfully. So Revelation 17, verses 9 to 12 say, "This calls for a mind with wisdom." Now this is an angel explaining things to John. He said, "This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast." Now that's about as clear as mud. That's why I said slightly helpfully. We'll talk about all of that more than we get there, but the question for us as we look at this passage in Revelation 13 is, how does this play out? Are we talking about future kings? Are we talking about past kings? Are we talking about kings that are kind of ruling alongside Rome in some capacity? Is it really kings at all, or is it just things that exercise authority and dominion over the lives of people in the world? These are, what are we talking about here? This is my reading, again, as I have told you since we've done Revelation. Don't believe it because I tell you, go research it for yourself. But my reading on this is that these are a large group of what Gordon Fee calls petty kings. Kings like the Herods in Palestine. They're king, the word Herod means king, right? They have power, they have authority, but it's only power and authority as long as they play the empire's game. At any point, the empire can come in and say, "You know what, buddy, you're not doing the job right, you're out." That's part of this dictatorial kind of thing, this imperial model that they have. It's administrative, it's governance, but it's from the top down. And so, of course, the emperor is going to put people in who are loyal to him, who are going to keep not the empire's best interest. He's not worried about the people on the ground, except insofar as they make him money and they keep him in power. And so everybody from those right next to the emperor down to the sort of Herods, the little petty kings, as we might call them, even further down into local administration, into the military ranks, all across the board, they have to have this dedicated loyalty to the emperor, and by way of the emperor, then the empire. So it seems to me that what John is describing here and in chapter 17 are these kinds of kings that come along and they're only as powerful as their dedication to the dragon is. Now, John is portraying the Roman Empire here as a grotesque monster whose authority has been granted by Satan. Right? Now, Daniel in chapter 7 has 4 different beasts. He's got the 3, and then he has the one that has these really gosh awful teeth, and it's totally indescribable. I mean, it's really rough. John sees one beast, but look at that description of the one beast he sees. Like Daniel's third beast, this one is like a leopard. Like Daniel's second beast, its feet were like a bear's. And like Daniel's first beast, its mouth is like a lion's mouth. Rome has assumed all of the power of the preceding empires. And because the dragon has given to the beast his power, his throne, and his great authority, as the text tells us. This is where we see John in prophet mode particularly strongly, because you know from Jeremiah and other places that the general consensus among the prophets is nobody listens to us. We go out and we do this prophesying and all this stuff, and basically the culture condemns us and we're exiled, outcast, whatever. But John is really actually kind of stepping into interesting waters here, because the first readers of his letter would actually have had mixed experiences with the empire. And what I mean by that is if you go back to those 7 letters at the beginning of Revelation, you'll remember churches like Laodicea and Thyatira were fine with the empire. Go look and see what it is that Jesus comes at them for. And in fact, we might could maybe just do that quickly. In Thyatira, he says, I know your works, your love and faith and service and patient endurance, and that your latter works exceed the first, but I have this against you, that you tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. What are they doing? They're giving in to the imperial cult. They're giving in to the Greek, or Roman rather, the worship of the Roman gods. And they're saying, well, yeah, that's fine. We can have a little of that too. Jesus is ours, Yahweh is ours, but you can come on and bring that into that. You will tolerate that. What is the empire going to have against that? Nothing. They don't necessarily want total ideological control. They just want enough control so that the people go along. All right? So that's just one example. That's what's going on in Thyatira. They're enjoying being a part of the empire. Because in most cases, the empire operated like a benevolent dictator. I once said that about a professor, and she snarled at me. But may or may not be my dissertation director, but that's a different story. I was helping her co-teach a class, and she was making the exam, and she asked her students, she said, well, I don't remember, it was like a reading quiz or something. And she told them in the quiz that they could pick one of 2 questions to go on their final exam. But then the third question on the reading quiz was, what does the inclusion of this question tell you about this course? And kids were all kind of like looking at each other like, what in the world does this question mean? And I was sitting on the front row, and she says, at school they call me Mr. Pittman. And she says, Mr. Pittman, do you have any ideas? And I said, well, you're a benevolent dictator. Yeah, she snarled at me. They all laughed, and then she got over it. But yeah, it was, whatever. But in some ways, that Jamila, if you're watching, I'm not calling you Rome. But there is a sense in which the empire is throwing them bones along the way. And so if you'll just play the game, it's the same thing with the kings. If you'll just play the game, you can be a Christian, scare quote, Christian, if you want to be. The problem are those pesky Christians who won't give up on the exclusivity of Jesus. They won't worship the empire. They won't worship the emperor. They won't worship the Roman gods. They won't do any of that. They want to stay in their own little world and do their own little thing, and they don't want to contribute anything to our eternal Roman society, right? What John is doing is he's seeing that part of the equation, and he's saying to all of these churches who are in good with the empire, as he reported from Jesus in those 7 letters, you got to get your act together because you're playing the game. You're aiding the enemy. You're aiding the dragon. You're aiding this beast. And then on the other side, he's saying to the ones who are being persecuted, I understand you. I see the evil that's lurking underneath this, and I'm here to expose it. Because what he wants all of them to see is that Rome is demanding the kind of loyalty that only belongs to God. And that becoming too comfortable with Rome is going to lure them into spiritual compromise. Now, here is my uncomfortable and unpopular statement for the morning. Americans are just as guilty. When we get far more worried about who occupies the White House and who occupies the Congress than we are worried about what we can do for God in whatever context we're put in, we've done it wrong. Does God establish the leaders? Absolutely. But that means he establishes the ones we like and the ones we don't like. There's a reason that they're there. We can sit and moan and groan about them all we want to, but there's a reason that they're there. What are we here to serve? God or the nation? I mean, we could sort of keep unraveling that. I won't, but that is the issue that John is seeing, is that some of these churches, these Christians, are getting too comfortable with Rome. Of course, those who are not Christian at all are fine with Rome, bring it on. And then there are those who are being persecuted by Rome. And he's already said to them, through the words of Jesus, hold on. I'm coming. I'm going to take care of business, but hold on. Persevere. All right? So when we get to verse 3 and sort of the beginning of verse 4, we see this interesting statement that the beast has a wound that is healed. And then we also know that his authority is given to him by the dragon. Now, John's got two ideas going on here, and one of these is like one of my favorite weird things that the Romans, like, it wasn't quite a mainstream belief, but it was pretty popular. And even among some Christians, it was pretty popular. Even today, we look at Nero as the worst of the worst of the Roman emperors. And so there was this idea around this time that Nero was going to come back from the dead. And that continues to manifest itself later on, beyond this period just a little bit, that Nero is the Antichrist, that the Nero Redivivus is the Antichrist come back. And there are other reasons for that, which we'll talk about part of them next week. One of them has to do with the numerology behind 666, but I'll get to that later. So John kind of takes this common thing that's here about the revived Nero, and he uses the language of that to express this deliberate parody of the death and resurrection of Jesus on behalf of this first beast. Because the Greek here, English translations, I'm not entirely sure why they choose to do it this way. It would be much easier to just do it right. The Greek translates something closer to a head that had been slain unto death, and then it was healed. Okay? We don't sing this hymn very often, but maybe you'll know the name of it. We have a Holy Week hymn called O Sacred Head Now Wounded. And that is the idea there, that, we have this literal image of the crown of thorns going in, but also the head of the body has been wounded, through his death. And that idea is in full force related to Christ in that hymn. So in the Christian mind, the wounding of the head, that mortal wound of the head, is just coming along. And part of the deception of the first beast is, I have this mortal wound which has been healed. Right? This is also part of that correlation between the Father and the Son. Satan is a counterfeit of the Father, while the beast from the sea presents himself as a counterfeit Christ. He has a mortal wound that was healed, so he has a counterfeit resurrection. The dragon gives to the beast his power and his throne and his great authority. If you go back to John chapter 5, verse 22 to 27, Jesus, all authority and power under heaven, in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Worship of the dragon and the beast go together. We see that. Down to verse 4, they worship the dragon, for he had given authority to the beast, and they worship the beast. Well, how does it go in Christianity? Worship of the Father and the Son go together. We saw that in chapter 4 and chapter 5, throne room scene. The one seated on the throne, the Lamb. Right? It's going together. And then the beast claims universal allegiance from all nations. You jump down to verse 7, and authority was given over every tribe and people and language and nation. We've already seen that language in Revelation. And it's always been ascribed to the power that God has over all creation. Well, now all at once, this beast has come up, and this beast has power and authority, yeah, over all nations. I'm telling you. But notice what happens when the beast appears. This thing just emerges. It hasn't done a daggone thing. And people are worshiping it. I could make any number of claims about this, but the one I think that I'm going to stick to is we don't need dramatic demonstrations of something's power to be convinced that it possesses the power. Fear will get you a lot of places. Just go look at Hitler. I mean, any dictator, but I think for us, probably the easiest one to see is Hitler. Fear will get you a lot of places. Mystery will get you a lot of places. What is this thing on about? Yeah, I see the wheels turn.
If I saw that thing come up, if I was there and I saw it, I cannot imagine how fearful I would be. And people are always looking for something to worship.
Yeah.
So, why not worship this thing that they never seen?
I'm not so certain that they're worshiping it out of fear.
I'm not sure if they saw it. I'm not sure who sees it.
Okay.
From the text. I know the dragon sees it, but I don't know. Maybe the world does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Go ahead, sorry.
If you do see it, I think this thing is beautiful.
Yeah.
Could be.
I mean, if we see something, just take us for instance. If we become fearful of something, what do we do most of the time? We run and hide.
Yeah.
But the devil is the author of deceit. So if I make this look very beautiful and inviting and it's got charisma and it's brilliance and all, guess what it's going to do? What is that going to do? It's going to draw people.
Well, and you think about the beasts, it looks like a leopard, its feet are like a bear, its mouth's like a lion. I mean, these are all the big guns in the animal kingdom, right? This is not, and they're all pretty. I don't know, maybe you can have your opinion about bears, I don't know, but there's something particularly majestic about a lion. And there's something sleek and, okay, if I can use this word in Sunday school and nobody hold it against me later, there's something kind of sleek and sexy about a leopard, right? I mean, it's got this quality to it. Yeah,
Graceful.
that's the Sunday school appropriate word, graceful. But I've been in orientation this week. Don't blame me. But yeah, I mean, I think and maybe it's both. I mean, maybe it's not fear like, oh gosh, I can get away from this, but like to look at that and to see all of that represented in this one creature. It's like a healthy respect kind of fear. Yeah.
But that's what I was thinking about Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, right.
When he set up the big idol, fall down. I would have been in awe. I would have probably fell down and worshiped him. I don't know that I would have been Shadrach, Meshach, and
Right.
Abednego.
Right.
If I don't worship this thing, it's going to destroy me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And he can because look at him. So yeah, right. So anyway, but it says the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. For whatever is going on, they're amazed and they're in awe over it, right? And the entire known world becomes followers of the beast. This isn't just the ancient Near East. This isn't even just the Roman Empire. I mean, I guess maybe you could make that argument because of the known world, but this is everybody that's not in with Jesus is worshiping this thing. And in John's mind, if you follow something, then you worship it. Well, okay. I mean, we don't like to think about it that way, but one of the favorite sayings in our society is follow the money when we're trying to figure something out, some corrupt thing that's going on with somebody. Why? Because money talks. So it's that thing that, for John, that thing that you follow is that thing that you worship. It's that thing you want to be surrounded by, The people that you want to be surrounded by are those people who also follow that thing. I mean, it's no wonder in Hebrews we're told not to forsake the assembly. What is it for? The edification of believers. Why is it for the edification of believers? Because you're surrounded by them. It's hard to be edified if you walk into a Satanist temple as a Christian. I mean, that's an extreme example, but you can't surround yourself with atheists and feel particularly edified either. They're good people, but what should make up the core of who you are can't be satisfied. Okay, I'm done. So, taking verse 4 on its own then, the empire is following, in John's mind, the empire is following this perverse sort of death and resurrection. And the whole thing has been orchestrated by Satan himself. Now, I keep saying, and I don't want you to misunderstand me, I keep saying that in John's mind all of this is about Rome. It is about Rome for him, because Rome is the oppressing power right then. Whether or not the ultimate meaning of it is about Rome, as I've been doing most of the morning, I can draw parallels between Rome and America. I can draw parallels between Rome and Great Britain. I mean, most of the major nations in the world have that similar kind of self-importance complex, arrogance, and all that Rome had going on. But for John, I think the thing in mind is Rome. We want to focus for just a minute on that response to the beast. They say, who is like the beast and who can fight it? Now we're parodying Exodus chapter 15, verse 11. That's Moses' song after they've crossed the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, not the Dead Sea. When Moses says, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? Who is like the beast and who can fight against it? I mean, this whole thing is taking God, the Father, the Son, the Spirit, head on. Oh yeah, you can do that, well we can do this. I mean, this is Satan's thing, right? And some people say, I'm not sure, I mean, I think this is certainly part of it. Some people say that the reason for the worship is because the beast has a blinding power so that the people are blinded to his evil and at the same time blinded to the beauty of Christ. I definitely think that's part of it. But something has to give you the idea that this thing is beautiful. That it is more beautiful than Christ, that it is more beautiful than evil. And again, I could turn that to any number of political issues. I don't want to get on a soapbox, but it's sort of like abortion. The conversation about abortion happens at the level of the life, or the livelihood, the life and the livelihood of the mother, or the life and the livelihood of the child. And which one do you privilege at what point of the baby's existence? Well, I'm a mother, or I'm pregnant with this kid, but I don't want to have it. It's messing up my livelihood. Well, said kid hasn't been born yet, so. I mean, that's where the conversation is. The beauty issue, and we need not miss it, because I don't believe that the vast majority of people who support abortion support the killing of babies. They support the beauty of the freedom of the woman who didn't want to have the child to begin with. That is the thing that is at the forefront. Listen to their rhetoric. That is the thing that is at the forefront of the conversation. You won't ever hear them say, yeah, I like killing babies. Because it's a conversation about which of these looks better. Well, that mom doesn't want that baby. She doesn't need to have that baby. Okay, I keep saying mom. That's not a mom. Did you understand what I'm saying? Here it is. The beast on large scale. We're blinded to the evil that he is. He looks more beautiful than Christ. And I think we can take that and apply it in a number of ways. And so the second question is justified. Who can fight against it? When something has that much power and is that capable of blinding you to its own evil and that capable of blinding you to the beauty and truth of Jesus, How do you fight it? Who can fight it? Now, from John's perspective, this is actually a purely rhetorical question. But it doesn't happen in the way that we might think that it does. Because John acknowledges God's people are about to die. They're about to be slain. Not because they make war against Rome, but because they refuse to make war for Rome. So verses 5 to 10, and I've got to hurry, but I want to make a general comment about this whole section and then kind of blitz through it individually. We want to read verses 5 to 10 very differently. I mean, who enjoys the part where the beast was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them? Not me. We like to conquer, but we don't like to be conquered. Also, Revelation's generally been very supportive of the people who conquer, the one who conquers, those who conquer their persecution and so forth. Well, now we have this thing conquering, so what do we do with that? And John basically tells us, as much as we might not like it, the way we as believers conquer is by laying down our lives for what we believe, for who we believe in. So, looking at verse 5 individually, we get some description of the beast's activities. And we see the numerical figure again of 42 months from Daniel 7. And during that period, which again I take to be a symbolic period of evil from Christ's first coming to his second coming, but whenever that period is, during that period, the beast is given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. But notice the phrasing. He was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. And then later, it was allowed to exercise authority. That power, number one, is not inherent in the beast. Just because the beast is there doesn't mean the beast has that power on its own. That power had to come from somewhere, and it came from Satan. Secondly, it also suggests that there's some limit because it was allowed. That doesn't mean it's still allowed. That means there's an end to it at some point when that authority ceases. And so we move to verse 6 then. That power results in a threefold blasphemy against God's name, God's dwelling, and those who dwell in heaven. The blasphemy is coming down on Yahweh, on heaven, and on his angels. Everything that is beyond the material, if you want to kind of think about it that way. And I'm just going to jump now to verse 7, but because there's the reason for all of this. On the one hand, the beast was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, showing us again that this power comes from Satan, also revealing that God has allowed it. But it also shows us that the limits of that power are actually pretty liberal. Authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. And that's just kind of hard. Why does God allow that? God could say no. God could say, take care of Kokomo. You can have Darwin, but Kokomo's mine. I happen to have a strong affinity for Hattiesburg, but Jackson, go for it. God could do that, but he doesn't. Instead, what he actually says is, take it all. Have authority over all of it. See how that works out for you. Have authority over all of it. And I can't help but think that some of Satan's arrogance coming in, God, like, okay, you think you can do it so much better? Try it. Try it. Now, at a level, that makes God sound very mean because people get caught in the crossfire. But then we have to think about what has the rest of Revelation told us about how God is by God's people. He preserves them. He protects them from his wrath. He doesn't necessarily protect them from the world's reaction to his wrath, but he protects them from his wrath. And then in verse 8 we see that the beast is worshipped just as the Father is worshipped. All who dwell on earth will worship it. But then we get very careful, John, because he gives us this next phrase, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. Now, I got to tell you something. Whoever translated the book of Revelation for the English Standard Version is letting their theological biases show right there. Because that phrase, before the foundation of the world, can go right there. So it can say everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world. Or it can go at the end of the sentence. So it says everyone whose name has not been written in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. If you put it in the first place, like I just read it, you have a real strong doctrine of the elect. If you put it at the end, you don't. Now you have a real strong statement about Jesus, but you have a strong statement about Jesus anyway. So the NIV chooses the alternative. It says, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. That's a Greek, that's a translation issue. You know, and I've heard it used both ways. I'll let you take it however you want to, because there's some truth in both statements, in my opinion. That idea, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world, we do have that phrase, but it comes in the ESV. It comes in Revelation chapter 17, verse 8. And there I should have copied it down in my notes, but the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast. See, they do it again. From the foundation of the world. So we have, wherever that phrase goes, we have it twice in Revelation. That's it. Even though we think about it a lot. All right? But consider the weight of that attribution. John is this master of heavy, deep sentences. And so in effect that he's saying that even though the Lamb was slain at a particular point in human history, what the Roman emperor at the time and what his army did not know is that their execution of this supposed revolutionary, this Galilean carpenter that really shouldn't have mattered except people were following him a lot and they didn't like it because he was not preaching the gospel of Rome. The execution of that guy was in fact God's ultimate redemptive moment, which had been orchestrated from all of eternity. Because at the heart of the Christian gospel is the awesome reality that God the Creator is also God the Redeemer. And according to John, that redemptive moment, which began historically with the creation of the planet, was ultimately fulfilled early in the first Christian century through the death and resurrection of the incarnate Lamb of God, the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world. That's what John has packed in to this one thing. And then when we get to verses 9 to 10, if we had any doubt that all of this goes together with what was in the beginning of the book, look at what John says. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. And we heard that over and over again in chapters 2 and 3. And then he borrows from Jeremiah chapter 15, verse 2. And he picks up at the same time, he borrows from Jeremiah and he picks up what he's already said about the beast, that it was allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them. And he says, if anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. It's like Hebrews. And just as it is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes the judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly awaiting for him. If you're going to go to captivity, you're going to go to captivity. If you're going to die by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. God has appointed all of this already. But your hope is not in this world. Your hope is in the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the world. So what John has offered is a clear warning to God's people regarding what is to come for them. And then he ends it with a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. It's going to be bad. It's going to be hard. But you have hope and you have a reason to endure. So that endurance will be evidenced by your faith in Christ. All right, we will do the second beast next week. Questions, comments? All right, if not, let me pray real quick. Gracious God, thank you for this time that we've had to come to your word and study your word. Lord, I thank you for the hope that is offered to us in Revelation, the hope of the assurance of our salvation by you through the sacrifice of your Son. And Lord, the awesome reality that it is Christ who rules and reigns and judges and will make all things new, and will bring an end to all of this as you see fit. Lord, I pray now as we go into the second hour that you would be with Ms. Dot, Ms. Dana, and myself as we do the music this morning, Lord, that we would not only do our own roles to bring honor and glory to you, but also that we would invite the congregation to do the same. And Lord, then as Kevin comes to preach, I pray that you would be in and about his words and in and about his spirit, Lord, that you would have him to preach the message that you've given to him the way that you would have it preached. And Lord, that you would give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts to understand what you have for us. And Lord, I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.